Okay. Welcome to everyone joining us from across the United States and around the world. My name is Carol Booth Olson, and I'm the director of the Wright Center. The Wright Center is a research and development center based at the University of California, Irvine, which is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. We're committed to supporting our growing community of teachers, school leaders, educational stakeholders, and college faculty by offering resources and learning opportunities like today's webinar to improve the quality of secondary writing instruction. The Wright Center, in partnership with the National Writing Project, is honored to host this webinar series dedicated to supporting teachers' hybrid and remote learning instruction. Last week, we hosted Carol Jago, who gave us a wonderful seminar about writing and reading poetry online and gave us also a lot of food for the soul. If you haven't had an opportunity to send us your poem, we are going to put together a digital poetry magazine, and we already have 120 poems in that digital magazine. Our webinar series will continue in September with 3 events that focus on culturally responsive, sustaining remote education, transformative justice in English language arts, and how to promote youth civic voice in writing to address complex emotions. I'll be giving you more information about these webinars at the end of Jim's presentation today. I'd now like to provide some digital logistics. First of all, we're very proud to say that over 3,000 people have registered for the seminar today. That's our largest response so far. The first 1,000 of you will be participating on a Zoom webinar platform. If you're joining us through Zoom, you can ask questions directly to our moderators using the Q&A feature. You can also chat with each other on the chat feature, both of which are probably at the bottom of your screen. The rest of you are joining us on YouTube live stream, and you can also ask questions using the chat feature that's mostly likely on the right of your screen. We have moderators who are sort of curating your questions, and toward the end of the session, Jim will be answering some of those questions. Also, Janelle Krishnan may interrupt with some burning questions as we go along. This webinar will be available for replay, and please visit our events page at wrightcenter.org for Jim's handouts and other materials. Now I have the privilege of introducing my very good friend, Jim Burke, who will be leading our learning today on designing academic writing assignments for all students, all classrooms, and all environments. After 28 years as an English teacher at Burlingame High School, Jim decided to take a new gig, sort of a continuation of his work, and he is now at Middle College High School, which is housed at the College of San Mateo. He's the author of more books than I can tell you the names of without taking up his full 2 hours. But some of the most important of which, The English Teacher's Companion, Reading Reminders, The 6 Academic Writing Assignments, What's the Big Idea, Academic Moves, and many, many more. He's the recipient of many awards, including the NCTE Intellectual Freedom Award and the NCTE Conference on English Leadership Award. As you settle in to listen to Jim's presentation, we want to invite you to think about designing your own writing assignments and which academic writing assignments you have that you would like to share with the group. And we do have a space where you can share with us on our website at wrightcenter.org your best writing assignments, and we'll make all those resources available to the group. So now, with great pleasure, it is my great honor to introduce Jim Burke. Take it away, Jim.
Well, good morning, everybody. Although I guess it's not necessarily morning where you are. I'm coming to you live from San Francisco on a nice, unusually sunny day. Mark Twain's famous quotation is, of course, the coldest winter I ever spent was summer in San Francisco. I'm really excited to be a part of this series for a lot of reasons. One, any chance that I have to get to work with Carol Booth Olson, as well as learn from Troy Hicks and Kelly Gallagher and Carol Jago. One of the funny things about doing these presentations that Carol and Kelly and Troy and I do is we so rarely actually ever get to see each other present. And so one of the really rare pleasures and privileges for this whole experience has been for me to just simply get to sit and watch Kelly and Carol and Troy present in a way that I never really get to do. So I'm just really grateful for that experience. I think we always wonder, where teachers that talk to us about their work are coming from. Do they live and teach on the same planet that we do? Or do they teach in some kind of rarefied special environment that doesn't really have a lot to do with the kids that we teach? So I'm gonna start by bringing you into my world as part of the conversation this morning. But before we do that, I just want to kind of loop back around to some of the things. These are pictures of kids that I teach or have taught. I wanted to just start by giving us a chance. If you weren't here last week for Carol or one of the other talks, then just jot down the questions that you have. But I'd like you to take a couple minutes. We're going to be try to be interactive about things, and post your questions or your comments or your connections in the chat stream, and we'll kind of see how that goes. And Janelle and others are going to kind of keep an eye on that and fish out some common patterns. But I think it's really important. We talk a lot about the idea of transfer of learning. So that idea that we should be sort of reaching back to the previous classes, the previous days, the previous units, and bringing that stuff along with us. So take a second and think a little bit about what are the questions that you're here to consider today. I am actually due back at school, not to start teaching, but kind of in the thick of it next week, later in the week. So it's all very real and very present for me. So what are some questions? If you heard any one of the previous speakers, what are some things that really are staying with you? Things that you've been thinking about? One of the things that's staying with me from last week is the $150 that'll be on my Visa bill from all the books that I had to buy for Carol Jago. So I'll try not to cost you as much today, so you can buy more of those great poetry books. Or if you have seen all three of the speakers, what are some connections that you can see kind of unfolding between those? So let's just take a couple minutes, let you think about that, jot down some questions, put those in the chat. It's an interesting word that Shannon Simpson used, in an honorable way. One of the things that I see running through a lot of the comments there in the chat area, which I certainly can relate to in my own classroom, is just kind of an unusually strong need this year. I think this is always a pressing issue for us, but a really dramatic need to be able to think about kids' emotional needs. I see the word story appearing a lot. Kelly was very compelling to me. About kind of rescuing narrative, the idea that narrative is not just a little thing it's not parsley on the side of the plate, and that it has really, really important work for us to be doing these days. By the way, I was looking around on Kelly's website last night for some things that I wanted to put on the last slide, and there's so much good stuff on there. But he's got some really interesting things on there about his sharing his coronavirus lesson plan structure that I found really interesting. So you should all take a chance to go look at Kelly's website later on. Those links are at the end. I'm sure they were on his stuff also. Let's give you 20 more seconds here. So I think the thing that I jotted down when I was thinking about this morning was what did all three of them have in common? And I mean, I've kind of echoed this already a little bit, but I just said that what they all had in common was that we need to be thinking about students' needs, emotional, academic, cognitive, existential, the skills they need to know to be able to use technology, their needs for technology and access. I think there's a tremendous set of assumptions about what kids had access to. I think we're realizing if you have a bunch of kids in a house and they're all using one hotspot from different teachers and the video, that kind of stuff goes way down. So even everybody's probably had some version of this awakening. I have just not been in a context in the past to be that aware of the number of kids in our district that are on free and reduced lunch program, and the extent to which the district has had to work to get meals available to kids. And so it's in a whole new way, it's made me aware of not just the cognitive needs, not just the needs for engaging literature, but the needs for food, the needs for the basic. We're kind of getting into Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and I think having to ask ourselves in ways that we're not used to, how are kids' needs being met? Cultural needs. I think we're all looking at the events that are currently going on. I mean, some of you might be teaching in a place like Portland. I certainly have a lot of friends that are teachers up in Portland. So I can't imagine right now what it would be like to be thinking about starting the school year if you were, teaching in a city that was going through what Portland's going through. So we have, the virus stuff going on, but we also just have the needs, kind of almost like the existential needs coming in. And I think that raises really, really important questions that we'll hopefully have a chance to look at this morning regarding how our assignments are going to meet all those different needs. Alfred Tatum in his work often talks about cultural literacy. We're really good at talking about the other kinds of literacies, but the needs for, making room for students' cultures in the assignments, the readings, and so on and so forth. So that was the thing that really stood out to me, was just this need to stop and ask, what are the different needs that I need to take into consideration? I thought it was very striking to me to listen to Carol Jago, who's so compelling when Carol talks about the classics and the importance of reading demanding high quality literature, and to listen to Carol talk about, in her career, she can't remember a time when kids had a greater need for poetry, and it raises questions for what poetry does. And Kelly's talk about the need for story, and Troy's talking about the ways that we need to be able to help kids connect to each other in these more digital environments. And that's a whole lot of sets of skills that we don't necessarily bring to the table. So what I want to do this morning is walk through some of the key ideas. I want to take you into my class, show you what I did and how I'm beginning to prepare for the year. And we're going to kind of move in and out so that what we're doing is anchored in your own classroom in ways that are helpful to you. So with that in mind, so I put this here just as a reminder that the ideas that are at the heart of the conversation today are from a book that I wrote called The 6 Academic Writing Assignments. And one of the things that I thought was, I really listened to Kelly about the role of narrative as a form of academic writing. And I would like to say that I think I addressed that effectively in the book. I think when I was listening to Kelly, I think he was making me realize that's something that I could probably, if I were going back, even address more. So much of it has to do with simply how you kind of the spirit with which you approach it. What are the sets of expectations? But what I did is I collected writing assignments for over a year, really, from districts around the country and my own school. I had about a stack of about 18 inches of writing assignments. And I went through and I just tried to identify what were the different kinds of writing assignments that teachers were giving students, and then try to look at what can we do to try to make those assignments more effective. So as I said, I think it's helpful to get a sense of my situation. So this is Middle College. Well, this is actually the College Center. The Middle College building is a little bit down to the left there, but we are up on this mountain, and this is relevant to my topic today. So we're up on this view of the bay. That's the San Francisco Bay you see behind there. The airport is just to the left. It's an amazing, beautiful place that we all go to work at and we love, and we're very happy there. And when I go there this past year for the first time after 28 years at Burlingame, I had these wonderful students in these rooms, and we were together and we were having a great time. And then Friday, March 13th, I went home and was told to come back on the following Monday and be prepared to begin as a remote teacher. And so suddenly, as of March 16th, this was my classroom, coming to you from where I'm sitting right now. I actually live in the house that my mother-in-law was born in. She's 90, she'll be 94 next week. She lives with us still. So this used to be what's called a sewing room. So this was suddenly my classroom, and I was broadcasting out of there to my classes of juniors, and I had very little time to prepare for that. And so as we start thinking about the year ahead, there was an article in the New York Times last weekend that was talking about the fact that we had been through plagues and sickness like this before, and that the goal was to take kids outside so they could get fresh air. And this was strikingly familiar and similar to some of the images that I've been given at school to reflect my upcoming classroom. So I just thought I would, because when you talk about design thinking, one of the first things you're talking about is constraint. And we'll talk a little more about that, but this was back in the early 19-teens. They had these great things called Eskimo blankets that you see the kid in there so that they could be outdoors on the deck of an exposed building. And on the right, you see one of the saddest pictures ever. This is a picture that somebody in a school district put out to try to demonstrate. I think they thought it was supposed to be a hopeful picture. Look, we'll be able to get the kids back into school. They'll just have to be a little bit distance for each other. But here you have this one student masked in an empty classroom, and I probably say it's the most dispiriting image of education I could imagine. We are the Bulldogs at Middle College, and so we are getting an entire new generation of swag. We're going to have Middle College masks. And so they had these classes where the kids would be taking their naps. The windows would be wide open for maximum air. And so my version of that is going to be the kids on Zoom, I guess. And so we're getting to get together with these kids online. Back in the 19-teens, they would have the kids do their classes. They're learning up on the roof. On the right hand, we see a picture that my principal sent me because we lost our school. So I guess I should point that out. Because our program my school is located on a college campus, and the college campus, a two-year college campus, is closed. We are left without a place to actually hold our school, our program. So we're going to be kind of dividing ourselves, as you'll see here in a minute, between the adult school and the district office. and another really highly educational space. So he offered this picture as one of the places that we could potentially grab to meet with our students. Back in the day, they would have these kind of outdoor tents. These are some of the rooms that they sent us initial pictures of, that we could hold our classes in small cohorts, but we pointed out that they're small and narrow and actually don't have any aeration or windows to the outside. So the solution to that was this. So this is the parking lot at the adult school. And this is a drawing. This is an actual drawing put together by somebody at my district to represent an image of what our classes would look like. And so, yes, those are parking spaces out there in the parking lot. Those are whiteboards, a monitor, desks. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to go carry out those desks every morning, but that is the situation. And so I can withstand that image so long as I have the hope of, in the second semester, in the future, next year, being able to get back into my classroom with my wonderful kids, writing in an environment like this on a campus like that. And so I think we're all in some version of our own limbo. My school is going to start 100% online. So let's take a second and just, I got that book that Carol Jago talked about last week by David Orr about writing poetry. And there was actually the introduction, I really liked it. The introduction was all the things that I do not like about introductions about books of poetry. Introduction as a list of things I don't like. And I actually thought it was potentially a fun model. Every paragraph begins, I don't like poetry. I do like very much certain poems and poets. I don't like introductions that are premised on critics. So why don't you take a second and just do a quick little writing in the chat area, just putting it out there a little bit as to what you don't like about the year ahead. I was thinking that kids might really enjoy some sort of short writing assignment like this because I think they like to tell us what they don't like. So take a minute. I don't like the unknown. I'm so with you, Deborah Keel. I know it's not funny, but I don't like bracing myself for a disaster. I like that one. So as people are typing this in, I'll just say that one of the things that I really struggle with is, I'm sitting in my office at home. I mean, we've all gone through our own variations. I'm sitting in my office at home. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it today. And one of the main reasons I find myself wanting to ask you to pop your thoughts in there for a second like that is just to feel your presence, because it's so, like, one of the things that I don't like is the extent to which I simply feel removed from the give and take of kids. And so it's, I find it strangely comforting to actually see real people and their thoughts going in there. One of the things, just as a personal aside, as we prepare to transition here, is that my daughter is in her last year of nursing school. And so just like with teachers, when we get our student teaching, my daughter's nursing clinical assignment, each semester has its own focus. And so her clinical assignment she just got the other day is to be working in the ICU at Marin General Hospital, where all of the patients from San Quentin are going. So have that added stress ball to juggle. So I think we're confirming that this is a really good warm-up writing assignment. Thank you, Jennifer. You know, the kids are very willing to jump in and could probably write with great passion about the things that they don't like. So it's a good example of, you know, one of the things that Kelly and Carol and others talked about is the role of models. So one of the things that I suggested that my wife consider doing, because she has to take care of her mother, and to try to lighten the load, was think about doing a Blue Apron recipe each week. I know there's different companies. This is not a sponsor or anything, but yeah, how teachers are. We just go like, wow, look at that recipe. That is so interesting. And so I looked at these Blue Apron recipes, and I thought that is, you know, for the online environment. I'm not saying like literally. It just suggests a lot of interesting things to me as a design for assignments. So take a look at it for a second, just in a very general way. We're thinking, you know, metaphorically here for the most part. And in the chat area, take a second and jot down what are some of the ways in which this seared salmon, you know, recipe with the nutrition guide on the side. What are some of the ways in which you could reasonably and effectively compare that to an excellent academic reading or writing assignment? So when Mona says she can see the finished product, I think I assume what she means is she can see what it's supposed to look like, right? The role of models, I think that's really great. See a number of people talking about step by step, kind of the logical, clear progression. I think this is one of the things that we all have to be so mindful of coming back this fall, is really being ruthlessly clear with ourselves about the extent to which our directions are not clear, or if kids do or do not know what those things look like. Because you know, sometimes if it's a screencast, we're not necessarily there for them to ask us questions, and I, you know, worry a lot about the kids that they're gonna fall through the cracks. You know, I started my whole teaching career as a special ed teacher. I started working with autistic kids, and even when I got out of high school, which I barely got out of, I was put in remedial writing class. So I started, you know, way down on the ladder, and so the importance of clarity of our intentions is always there. But I think when we come back in the fall, in these more digital environments, so my understanding is that we're going to be 100% remote for I think they said the first 4 weeks, and then the plan is, if everything works, for us to go to stage 2, which will be, you know, partial getting together. So when Melissa says, Rankin says that what she likes is the visuals, again, I just think we can't emphasize this enough. The importance of kids knowing what the thing we're going to do looks like. We saw Kelly week before last, I guess it was, talking about doing some of the writing right there in class with his students. I think I remember Nancy Atwell talking about in one of her books that nothing changed her teaching more than overcoming her anxiety about writing in front of her own students. And I think that's definitely true. Yeah, so we see, you know, what is there that's common to reading and writing assignments. There are clear outcomes. We know what it looks like. It is, as far as engagement, well, it looks delicious. I guess I ate that at some point. I just kind of went down and grabbed one out of the kitchen somewhere. It's healthy. It makes something that seems difficult, it breaks it down into manageable steps and makes us feel like we can still be, effective cooks, or, as it were for us, teachers. And I think that's one of the things that we want to think about. I think it's also, this is something I'm going to come back to later on. If you look at the directions, as we would appreciate with good writing, you either have kind of orienting introductory phrases and then specific verbs, or you start with verbs. So you have wash or roast or prepare or cook, and arrange, etc. So when we think about the words, I mean, this is one of the things that really came up when I studied all those different writing assignments. You start looking at the language people use, and there's such a rich opportunity for confusion. So keep this in mind. I think the other thing that we could point out over here is, when we look at the nutrition facts, the question is really what's the nutritional content, and I think what we've seen with Kelly and Carol and Troy in the past presentations is engagement was certainly, it's got to be delicious, but there was a real substance to the meal. It wasn't just a big bowl of cotton candy. In fact, I think one of the things that was, again, going back to Kelly's talk about narrative, one of the points that he was making was the extent to which we so often treat, or have been taught to treat, narrative as light fare, as a side dish, when in fact, the more you look at things, the more you realize that narrative is everywhere, and used in all sorts of really, really important ways. So anyway, I think it's a helpful thing for us to keep in mind as we go through what's kind of a little bit at the heart of the talk this morning. And so I'm going to briefly introduce this, and then we'll come back out for a little more interaction. So design thinking, in one way, is very similar. Something we're familiar with in a certain way. It's not that different than the writing process. But what I like about the design thinking is we will benefit from this model and everything that we're doing this year, if you can keep it in mind. Because what design thinking is doing is it's asking us to think, and to me, this is just a transformative thing. It's asking us to think of our students as users. So just as I'm a user of this, this cell phone, of this laptop, of whatever other, tools and things like that, our assignments are things that our students use. Our class, we are things that students use. And if they can't use them well, if we haven't thought of them as users and prepared them to be able to use the things that we bring in well, then it's not really going to be it's not going to be likely to lead to success. So what design thinking has done for me is it's forced me to stop at the beginning of, on a daily level with my lesson plan, and I saw this in those examples of Kelly's lesson plans that I saw last night on his website. It's forced me to stop and be very deliberate, very intentional, and to say, and this is what we're going to focus on for a little bit here, is that first step is to empathize. Who are the people that I'm designing this for? I'm not designing a lesson plan for everybody. In my case, I'm designing this lesson, this unit, everything that I'm doing for these juniors who are, without going too much into it, it's a middle college program. So the students are taking my high school English class on a 2-year college campus, and then they take their high school history class, and then all the courses they take the rest of the day are college classes. So I have kids that are in college half the day and in my high school class. So I have to be working to challenge them at that level. I have to be helping them prepare for college level work. So if we go to this first stage, this idea of who are your users. So I'm going to ask you to think about the year ahead. You may not know your exact kids. Maybe if it helps to kind of think to last year, that's fine. But if we start with this idea of, empathy and who are your students, there's a couple things that I put up here to give us a way to think about it. So, so you could jot this stuff down in the chat area, or you can, kind of do some doodling on your own. But who are your students? Who are the kids? Whether and that needs to include your. So like the other day, I went through all the different transcripts for all my students last semester, and I compared how their performance was spring semester versus fall semester, because I wanted to be able to see who dropped off after we went online. And to a great extent, it was very predictable, right? Kids who are in less stable situations, kids with learning needs, were the ones that were more likely to have problems that I think we were all struggling to try to figure out how to address. So use any one of these tools, whether it's looking at the emotions of your kids, whether it's, thinking about, the pain scale. Is kind of an intense analogy to use, but basically that idea that your kids are, our kids are coming in each day somewhere on that scale, right? They're doing great, they're doing all right, or they're really having a hard time with it. So so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that. Think about the implications of thinking of your students as users, and especially as that relates to your writing assignments and your reading assignments. And then we'll come back together and we'll talk more about it. If it helps you to kind of narrow down and think about a specific subset, it's sort of like things went well in the spring, but I have a group of boys that really were struggling that I need to do a better job with, so adjust it as you need to. So I think that's is it Terry? It's moving too quickly there. Terry, I think it was asking a really interesting question that is probably more specific to elementary school teachers, but I think we all have a sense of that. And her question, if I caught it correctly, was who should I think of as my users of the assignments if the assignments are being done by parents at home? And I think that's I think it's a really remarkable question and such a good example of that extra juggle. We have a really good friend who's a kindergarten teacher, and it's amazing what she's having to juggle. In the book that I did, the books that I did for Corwin, the Common Core Companions, there's a format in there that you don't have to go by the book, but there's a format that I had in there that you might find helpful, which is there was a column like for a standard, and it would say what the student does, and then there was a column that said what the teacher does in that situation. And I can imagine kind of creating something of a template for something like that, that says what the student does and what the parent does. And again, going back to that recipe, I think it's a really good example of, excuse me, it's a really good example of one of the ways that we have to go back and think, when you're thinking about people as users, then you're really forced to think about where things will break down. And I think the main way they break down, if you go back to some of the comments, is they break down when people don't know what that looks like. So so I, off the top of my head, I think if I were trying to do something like that, I would be taking screenshots as needed to try to provide that example. Charlene asked another really good question, which I think we all have to think about. So she's asking, would I use that empathy map scale with my students? So I have a version of it, which isn't in the workshop, but I can try to find a way to get that available to you guys. But yeah, I think, to make it, a quick check-in, I think we need that. I think we need to be able to monitor our kids in different ways. I think the catch is, if we, so, the pain scale actually comes from medicine, from the medical field, right? So I'd have an operation a couple of years ago, and I didn't actually realize that the number that I gave them on the pain scale determined how much pain medication I got. So I kept, like playing it a little low, because I always thought, well, I can always be in more pain. But then when I found out that it determined how much pain medication I got, I was much more quick to say, like, oh, I'm definitely like an 8 or a 9. So I think the importance of seeing what that looks like for the person at home who's being a teacher or the student is going to be important. The back to that question about monitoring kids' wellness, I think we have to do that for the students, but I think we have to not. I think it could devolve into kind of an all-consuming thing. So I think there needs to be a structure. I think I kind of did Monday check-ins and Friday check-ins for most of the time in the spring, and I felt like that was helpful. I kind of did it a couple different ways. I didn't use the pain scale, but I had like a numerical scale that was kind of, I didn't want to imply they were in pain. So I had some other version of something like that as well. But Marina, as far as I know, this is being recorded and people will be able to see it later on. So anyway, I do think that we have to keep tabs on kind of the emotional weather of the kids, and realize, again, back to the user analogy, realize that what is easy and obvious and all that kind of stuff for some kids is really not for others. And so as we go through here, I think one of the things we have to do is realize that we have to ways of not just keep a check on the students, but keeping a check on ourselves and keeping our expectations clear and consistent. Just as a brief aside,
we have a great question that I'd like for you to respond to from the Zoom platform. And
sure.
it just
can you hold that question for just 1 second?
Certainly.
I just wanted to say one other thing about the pain scale. So I am, at Heinemann, I used to have a book called I can't remember what it was called, but it was called the Day Book, and it was about personal and professional balance. And I am, as we all are, very concerned about our own well-being, right? Don Graves has a wonderful book called The Energy to Teach. And so one day after school, when we were having a team meeting, I brought this pain scale in, and I just said, because we were all working remotely at that point, not seeing our colleagues. And I said, I just thought we should start by taking a quick second to check in with each other, because one of the people I teach with, got the virus. And I put this, I think I actually put this actual diagram up there of the pain scale. And there were only 8 of us, and it took an hour for us to go through that, because the need people felt to share their feelings, and the stress they were feeling was so profound. And so I just want to emphasize the importance of taking care of each other as we go through these things as well, because I do think the stress is going to be higher. In our school, it was credit, no credit in the spring. Now it's going to be grades in the fall, and so that's going to bring the stress levels up and things like that. So Janelle, what was the question?
Yeah, so this builds right on to what you were sharing earlier about you and your colleagues. One of our community members asks, how do I build assignments that build trust and community?
Such interesting words, right? So trust. I think I'm thinking a lot about trust early on, especially because we did all the stuff at the end of the year where it was kind of, you'll kind of see the work that I did in my class, but I had to kind of build the bicycle as I learned to ride the bike as I was building it in the spring. Now what we're doing is we're all coming in the fall, and I'm just going to kind of assume that everybody's kind of doing some variation on this, and that issue of trust is going to be such a different challenge for us, right? Because in the spring I had all my students, they knew me, they trusted me. I worked really hard to build connections with my students, and so I had that. And now I don't right now have any expectation of seeing my students in person that I'm aware of, at least for the first 4 weeks of school. I believe is my understanding. We all have this feeling of like it seems to change all the time, but so that I think how we communicate, I think the when we create these assignments, whether they're small writing assignments, if you go back to some of the assignments that Kelly was having kids write about, in their notebooks and things like that, I think if we go into personal writing, which I think is really important, but I think we really need to cultivate that atmosphere of trust, that this isn't going to be put out in front of the class without their knowledge or anything like that. And trust is also essential, because we have to come into the year and with substantive demanding assignments, right? I mean, the kids have in fact largely gone without structured educational experiences by the time we start up, it'll be almost 6 months, and so there's going to be a fragility, I think, in there. There's going to be an insecurity in some kids, and then it just gets more complicated from the user perspective. Every app you add, every new demand that you add to the task. And so we'll talk more about that as we go through, but I think that word trust is such an important one to think about, right? Are you going to ask me to use whatever Pear Deck to do some assignment? Are you going to ask me to go onto Flipgrid, whatever it might be, to do something like that? And then as soon as you do that, my first thought is, oh God, I don't know how to do that, or my computer isn't up to watching that video, so I already feel insecure about my position. And that is a lot of what I think is, I'll just speak for myself, I think is capable of making a tremendous drain on our energy, because what I feel that we're all having to do is we're having to send out these feelers to each one of our kids in our imagination and kind of run this assignment through, like, okay, that'll be fine for Raul, that'll be fine for Greg, that'll be fine for Tina, that'll be fine for Maria. Okay, so this other student is going to have a really hard time with that. He's not going to know what that looks like. Am I going to have to follow up with him individually? And those are some of the things that I think we're going to have to learn how to do, so that student learns to trust us, that they can say they didn't understand. Because I think what's easy, and this, how it is, these are always the kids for whom we end up being the most concerned. They're the ones that are least likely to say, excuse me, I don't have a computer that does that, or I don't have an internet connection that's working, they can often have a hard time advocating for themselves. One of the books that's made a huge impression on me in the last 2 years is Tom Newkirk's Embarrassed or Embarrassment, and he talks about, when you really look at, he doesn't use that word user, I think, but when you look at a student's experience of school and the different assignments and things like that, the opportunities for embarrassment are so everywhere at all times. And I think this is one of the things that we really have to, again, that's why the design thinking process starts with empathy. It starts, you've got to start with understanding who it is, that you are designing these assignments for. So I'm so interested in all this stuff, and I can kind of bog down in it. So I'm going to nudge ahead a little bit, and Janelle is just going to jump in at any point where she feels like I should clarify something or share a question. I'm very comfortable responding in that way. So once you've thought about who the kids are that you're teaching, so my classes can be as high as 35. Some people have much smaller classes. Kelly's down in the LA area. You can have up to just crazy numbers like into the 40s down there, and so those are the constraints within which we design these assignments. And then you put all that stuff together, and you where your students are, and then you decide what are the problems they're having that we can best address through this assignment. So I think Carol last week did a really great job talking about the kinds of things that maybe we realized. She had that what was it, the Goldilocks poem. I really liked that, right? So she was talking about a lot of kids have anxieties around poetry, and so one of the things that she talked about was the Goldilocks poem, of a poem that's easy, a poem that's that's more difficult, and a poem that's just right. And I think that creates that kind of space in which to begin to address kids problems. And then once we figure out what the problems are, then we've got to begin coming up with ideas, basically throwing the spaghetti against the wall. So I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like in my class here in a minute. But back to Kelly's example, do I want to have kids write a narrative? If I want to have them write a narrative, just do it in class, make it a long-term thing, make it something they'll kind of keep building on, whatever the assignment might be, but you're just kind of coming up with ideas. This is very much where I am right now for my classes. And then to come up with a prototype, right? And so you come up with, we take Carol's example of the Goldilocks poem and try that out and make a decision about how to configure that, and then go ahead and try it, and then test it out and see how it goes, and then get their feedback on that assignment, and then revise it as needed and put it into, implement it, or toss it and go back to the pile and start over. So this is, to me, this is very much where we are right now. I think everybody, even if we weren't going on, this is where we are, right? Who are the kids, whether they're kindergartners, whether they're ninth graders, whatever they might be, who are your users? And I think if you are, yourself uncomfortable with using some of the technology, I'll be honest, I'm very clear for myself of trying to be as limited and minimal as possible in using the technology, because I think, let's put it this way: if I want to have them use a text online, and you'll see some examples in a minute. Now we're already in the technology world, so they got to go online, they've got to click on links, they've got to open that up. If I add features to the program, so if I say let's go into Kami and use annotation features, now I've got a new app and I've got a bunch of features. Or if I say go into this other app and you can work together with others, every time we do that, it adds degrees of complexity to the assignment that make cognitive demands on us and on the students, that can potentially undermine that trust And so I think those are, the things that we really, really have to be mindful of. When I went through all those different assignments, one of the things that I would often do is go through people's directions and just kind of create little hash marks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the number of mental moves and actions they were actually asking their students to make in sometimes just what we would think of as like a 15-20 minute homework assignment. And it was crazy to look at the number of, if the kids really did everything that the teachers were asking at the level they were asking it, they would have spent 3 hours on some of these assignments that teachers assumed would take just a few minutes. And probably part of that struggle would have been because they didn't know what it looked like. So let's stop for a second and do two things. One, if anybody has any questions about the design thinking process, and then two, I want you to think about, so I'm going to assume, and you can adjust this as you need, I'm going to assume that you had some experience one way or the other teaching online, teaching remotely in the spring. And that's what I'm kind of asking you to go back into and think about. If you didn't, because you weren't teaching yet or whatever, then just adjust this as needed. But what I want you to do is I want you to go back and make a list of the kinds of writing assignments that you're having students do. And I don't mean each individual assignment. Like Kelly was having kids write a bunch of stuff in journals. So just, so Kelly, if he was doing this, might just write, daily journal writing. That's fine. And if you had, if you had kids, writing practice, AP essays for the AP test they didn't take or something, that's fine too. So not each specific assignment, but just the kind of representative assignments. And then I want you to pick the one specific assignment that you think was the most effective and the one that was the least effective, and do a little thinking about why that assignment was effective and why the other one was not. And if you want to write that stuff in the chat area, that's totally fine. If it's helpful for you to, write it on a piece of paper or something that, on your own computer, that's okay.
Jim, as folks are considering these questions, one thing I'd invite you to help us think about is balance. I see a theme coming up in the questions around balancing of different types of writing that happens. So perhaps you can touch on that. Excellent question.
So let me give people a second to get their things, their ideas down. That is Devin on the left and Lauren on the right, by the way. Wonderful kids. So as you're jotting, I'm gonna address that issue of balance in a couple of different ways, maybe a little bit different on some level than what Janelle was asking. So on the one hand, there's the balance of formal, informal, large, small, kind of daily writing, long-term writing. There's also, I think, in a way that we have to think about more than we usually do, is the balance between the students' needs and demands of different classes. And that's another thing for us to monitor. I found students complaining a lot about the wide array of experiences they were having. So some teachers had this attitude, and maybe hopefully this will balance out in the fall. Some students had teachers who basically had this attitude of like, well, you guys aren't doing anything anyway, so I'm going to make sure you have plenty of work to do. And they really laid it on and overwhelmed the kids. And we had a lot of stress as far as that goes. But another angle of balance is, so we're all sitting in front of our computers right now, and we're talking about designing assignments that raise the question of the work environment in which kids will do the work. And Kelly, I believe, talked about having his students use a paper notebook, so because kids think differently on paper. I'm 100%. You can see pictures there with my students, kind of a blend of those two things. I definitely, the research clearly shows that kids think differently in different modes, whether they're writing by hand versus the computer. But the other thing is, the average, I think the National Center for the Study of Media before, in the pre-COVID era, I think they said that the average kid the age of my students, like high school juniors, was spending roughly an average of 9 hours on a screen a day. It's an average. Those kids, they might have 2 or 3 screens going simultaneously, so I don't know how that fits in there. And for some kids, my serious gamers or whatever, they're going long past that. And so when we're designing assignments, I think we really have to be intentional about the balance of screen time as well, right? I think we need to ask ourselves, is this an assignment that needs to be done on the screen? Or, can I give them a choice? But the other thing to think about is if they're doing all that work, I realize if we're not seeing them in person, they can't, turn in a paper, but the balance on our own workload, because if it's all digital, if it's coming to us, then that is time that we have to spend that many more hours on the screen. And so you've got the hours that we're spending on the screen preparing things, you get the hours we're spending on the screen teaching, and then the hours on the screen potentially looking at things. And so I think we really need to, Kelly talked the week before about not looking at every word that kids write, and looking at some of the balance, and I completely agree with Tamara's comment there about not all screen time is created equal. And I think what I would say to that is that goes to my point, which is that it has to be intentional, right? So if we're having the kids do something on a screen, I think we just need to know why are we having them do it on the screen or using that app. So I think balance is important. It's important in a different way that I want to pivot into. The one thing that I want you to keep in mind, that we don't have time to talk about this too much right now, is what were the elements that were in common on the assignments that were effective, those assignments that went really well versus those that were not effective. So what I want to do, let's see here, is I want to bring you into a couple different assignments that I did and kind of move in and out of your own assignments and let you use my the slides and my examples to spur your thinking. So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, I tend to have some inclination towards sounds, I guess, is the 7 T's. I just keep thinking about the importance of being agile, which is always important as a teacher, but in the year ahead. So I just wrote this down for myself last night, that I expect every day to present new friction points, and I'll talk about what those are in a minute, and obstacles that will threaten to undermine my teaching. An agile teacher will monitor students' needs and progress as both learners and people, and then decide which of the following T's they should emphasize or manipulate or pass on for that day, so they can increase the likelihood that the assignment will achieve its intended effect. And so I think we have to realize that sometimes, we look at a text that we were going to teach, and we realize that is not the right text for this time. It's the kids they're not ready for it, or they're overwhelmed. Back to the balance issue a little bit. They're cognitively overloaded. If you look at some of those examples that Kelly was putting up in his presentation, 500, 750 word columns, things like that are engaging and manageable. I think that those are some of the kinds of things that we can look at. You'll see the text that my students read in the spring. The topics, I think kids coming in the fall, particularly those who are passionately engaged by or affected by the issues that have been going on over the summer with protests around Black Lives Matter and whatnot, they are going to want to see room for them to engage with those topics. Excuse me. And so I think if we have kind of received curriculum from those that have developed it, I think we need to be willing and able to look for ways to add other topics in there so the kids are engaging. I think we have to look at the demands of the tasks and ask ourselves, maybe this task needs to be broken up into a couple steps, because right now that seems like too much to ask of the kids. I think the techniques, this is like one of the things that I need to learn how to do in the coming weeks, is how to set up, I guess, kind of discussion rooms in Zoom, so kids can go off and have a, or Google, they can have a conversation with each other. So techniques like that are demanding to us extra time to set them up. The technology, like which apps we should use, tools, and then what knowledge it is that we want to transfer. So I think these are all part of this process that we're talking about here when we think about designing assignments. And so these are the key points that I came up with. And I want to look at these a little bit and then give you some time to think about these as they relate to the assignments you were just writing about. So when I went through all these different writing assignments, it wasn't a rhetorical model that I was trying to do, like narrative and argument and things like that. I was just trying to see what teachers were actually assigning, and so they broke down into 6 primary kinds of writing assignments. And so as I talk about these briefly, I want you to think about which of these categories your writing assignments fall into, and some of them you'll notice can accommodate a writing assignment might fit a couple of them. But writing to learn is primarily going to be the kind of writing that you're doing in a notebook, you're doing in a journal, you're doing kind of writing practice around certain things. Short answer is going to be writing that is anywhere from a sentence to as much as a paragraph, but generally paragraph is a little bit long for a short answer. Writing on demand, we're all highly well too familiar with that. A process paper simply means a paper, any writing assignment that goes through some version of the writing process. And that might not be the whole writing process. It might just, you might just decide that I want to really focus on, the idea generation phase of strategies around that. But a process paper is going to be any paper that the kids, work on and they revise. A research paper or a report is going to be a bigger, longer thing. And so you'll see an example of that from my class here in a little bit. But that's going to be something where the kids are going, longer. So in my class, the kids have what's called the expert project, which goes for most of the year. And then it culminates in the paper. I guess I have to be excited or grateful that they were able to finish and turn in their paper just before we went into the COVID quarantine. Because I guess they would have found a way to get those papers to me one way or the other. But I went off into the quarantine with, this massive load of papers. But I love those projects. And then alternative forms are mixed media. So those are any kind of non-traditional papers. So they can be kind of business forms, they can be multimedia forms and things like that. And so some of these things can be dovetailed into each other. So for example, you can have kids write short answers. You can have them write paragraphs about a chapter and do that as they go along, and actually be writing a draft of a paper that when they finish it, they'll have kind of all the body paragraphs, and then you can have them write an intro and a conclusion, and then suddenly you have a paper that is a process paper. You can have kids do a writing on demand essay and use that as an assessment. And then you can, for an AP class or any other kind of class, and then you can flip that over and say, okay, great. So there's your grade on that as an assessment. And now we're going to take it as a rough draft of that paper. We're going to actually, turn it into a process paper and work with it. So some of these papers, some of these assignments, you can design them in ways that, kind of build on each other in a variety of ways. A couple key concepts that I think are really important. So design always involves constraints. So my classes are 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week. When I was back in Birmingham, we had a block schedule, but now we don't. So that's what I have. I have 30 plus students in 50-minute periods, 5 days a week. And now I have the added constraint of them being online and not in front of me, and all the constraints that go along with that. I've the constraints of the technology in all different ways. So things that I might otherwise do, and I think the technology won't allow you to do that. You're designing an experience. This to me has been really transformative. So you are transforming. I think you've heard Kelly and Troy and Carol talk about that a lot. Like, the kids need an experience that is much more aware of, I think, and sensitive and empathetic to their needs and their emotions right now. I think that we ignore that at our own peril and at the kids' potential harm. So you're designing an experience that needs to take into consideration what the kids need as people and as writers. We've talked about the idea of student as a user. One of the things that I got this idea largely from Ernest Morel. If we think about writing assignments, and I think this is a big this point is a especially tricky one for the coming year, because it goes back a little bit to that balance question. Is the idea of the inspiration point versus the perspiration point. So inspiration is, what Ernest said in this meeting we were in at one point was, we're really good at thinking about the inspiration point, getting the kids engaged. This is a great topic. I really like writing about this. But the transformation for their learning as writers, their growth, doesn't happen if you don't push through and get to and work past the perspiration point. It's a little bit like when you go to the gym and your muscles are feeling it, like then you're building some strength. And so I think we have to look at our writing assignments. We have to look at the tasks. We have to look at the texts. And we have to ask ourselves, where's the perspiration point in there? And so when you go back and you look at those assignments you were just writing about, I'm going to ask you to do that in a minute. I want you to ask yourself, where is, you should basically be able to point to the place that was really hard for kids in some productive way. And then that becomes where we come in to help them through that difficulty. So we should be baking in, that kind of productive, those cognitive demands. Identify and then address and avoid friction points. So there's two kinds of friction points in assignments. There's bad ones, which is the stuff that kids run up against that they don't know how to do. So an obvious one for us in the year ahead would be technology, like a friction point of a kid not being able to get online, a friction point of a kid not being able to use an app like we're asking them to. That's a bad friction point. A good friction point is something that we build in, and I think this is going to be very important for the coming year. A positive friction point is where we build something in that is there to kind of stop and catch things to make sure they work well. So I'll give you an example. The research tool Noodle Tools. Every time you open a new document, it asks you to restate your research question. And so kids find that annoying, but part of the purpose is to keep them mindful of what the research question is, but also because they're using Noodle Tools for research, we all realize that very often when you're doing research, your inquiry changes and it evolves. So it might not actually be the same research question it was. So building in, friction points that are positive, that are asking kids to, reiterate, what it is that the question they're trying to answer or whatever it might be, are a very important intentional way of kind of monitoring the kids' progress, but also helping them to deepen those connections. I do that a lot with the Expert Project. And then that last thing is design thinking simply focuses on intentionality. So if you're having the kids use an app, there should be a totally clear, defensible, instructional reason why you're having them use that app. If you are, giving them models so they know what it looks like, I will typically give them 3 different models so that they kind of show a range, so they know, so they're not just getting like a single, model that ends up making it sort of formulaic. So, so I want you to take a couple minutes, and I want you to think about the assignments that you were jotting down. I want you to think about the assignments that you need to build for the coming year, and then after this, I'm going to show you the assignments that I'm in the process of having to develop for my first unit and what this looks like in my class. But take a minute and look over some of these key principles. Look at I'm not going to read through the design framework, but take a look at that. And if you notice in the assignment that went well, like, okay, I did those things, and the one that didn't go so well, I didn't do that. I didn't provide an example for them, and that's probably one of the things that made that not as effective. So take a couple minutes and apply this to your own classes and think about it. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them in there.
Jim, as folks are considering these ideas, I have a couple questions that are kind of a synthesis of many people's questions. And so I'll give you a statement from one of our participants, and then I have some follow-up questions I'm hoping that you can clarify for us.
Sure.
So Kristen asks, is it even fair to have students complete writing assignments if we can only realistically try our best with specific levels of instruction and attention and feedback as we're teaching online? So my questions to you is very practically or pragmatically, when you come in to help students throughout their writing process, what does that look like? And how do you monitor progress in an online teaching environment?
Well, first of all, with a hope and a prayer. So it depends on our circumstance, right? So so I can only right now I can really only speak best from the experience that I had in the spring with my program, which without going into it too much, I had 2 classes of roughly 32 juniors, and so I had a total of, I'll just round it up to 65 kids that I had to work with. The kids that go to our program are wonderful. They often tend to be a little more, need a little extra time and attention in different ways. And so what I did is I had, you'll see a schedule of this in a couple minutes. I had a meeting calendar where I would have scheduled meetings. They were in groups according to the unit that they chose. And so I would have group meetings with them where I would discuss what I was seeing about their writing in different contexts. And then I would have one-on-one meetings with them that went about 15 minutes, and where we would talk about their work or the help that they needed on different assignments, or I would give them some feedback. What I was not doing at that time, because I'd collected the big research papers, so I had a stack of papers that averaged about 20 pages, which is not. So it's been 28 years since I've been the new guy, and as a new guy, I did not really understand what this assignment that I was expected to to do would lead to. So it's a great assignment. It's a phenomenal assignment. But so I had more than my fair share of work on highly academic 20-page papers. And so what I was doing I was reading those papers and giving them feedback in an audio form on, the kids would then hear, but it wasn't kind of live, interactive, in kind of in a conference kind of form. But then what I would do is I would give kids the option of setting appointments up with me. So when the kids did finally get their expert project papers back, they would get my oral feedback, which, was, I'd say, probably an average of 5 minutes, with me, usually on my phone saying, Janelle, I really like that introduction. I see a couple different things in there that you did really well. A couple things in there that I think you should work on. And so they would listen to all of that. Usually they would have the opportunity to revise, but this was not the year for that. And then if they wanted to talk to me more about it, then we would bring their paper up on the screen and we would talk about it. If you're somebody, who's more like where she just went, Charlene, who's got 180 students, I think you have to decide what you can do well within the constraints of time. And so I think one of the things, if I had 180 students, I'll be honest, I would be I'd be having the kids write, and I'd be very intentional about it. I think the question would be, would I be having them write longer papers? I think I would probably be having them write, kind of like that paragraph approach that I was talking about. So I can be doing writing instruction in smaller bits that they can then eventually, like at the end of the book or something like that, snap together if that's what I feel like they need to work on. Kelly talked week before last about the 4 papers, 4 books kind of model. I think that's a really complicated, I support what he's saying. I think that's a really complicated approach in the online environment for kids to be, kind of feeling like they're thrashing about in the digital sphere to write, 4 longer papers about books without kind of the classroom support. And then you go back to their personal needs, right? I mean, I think the need for kids to have a little more of that personal space. So I'm looking in the year ahead, in the fall semester, I'm looking for making room for a little more personal writing. I'm looking into a couple of different things. I put a link at the end of the slides to Jennifer Gonzalez's website. She had a thing about 5 or 6 different ways to incorporate blogs into your class. So I want to look into that. I'm not sure yet that I'm going to do it, but I think my sense is my students are going to need a kind of writing that's going to be intellectual and academic, but they're also going to need a space to be able to process stuff that's going to be going on. Because I have juniors, the added strain of what all this is doing to college and things like that, I think is going to be a much bigger source of stress. Janelle, was there another question?
There's just one follow-up question about this, the way in which you provide feedback using orating feedback into your phone. Can you share a little bit about students' personal learning needs and accessibility when it comes to the types of feedback, like the mode of feedback in which you provide? Do you recommend that we consider providing students with options on how they receive feedback from us, or anything that you have to share is welcome?
I don't recommend that if you have 180 students. So you won't make it to the end of September. I think so. I spent a lot of time looking into the oral feedback thing, and I was obsessive about making sure that kids would be able to access it regardless, that they didn't have to have a fancy iPhone or smartphone or anything like that, that they can get it on any number of different devices. it basically comes to them in an MP3 file or something like that. There's a number of different ways to do it, and there's slides later on in the stack that I don't want to jump to that right away. But what I would say is the audio feedback consistently gets the strongest support from students. Where I think it gets a little complicated, and you see examples of these later on if you're looking at the slides, if you're doing it from within Canvas, if you're doing it from within Turnitin and things like that, now you have added things. I see Maureen talking about Screencastify, so I haven't used that. What I get concerned about, and I don't know that this applies to Screencastify. So the reason I like using my phone, there's a free app that comes with the phone. It's just voice memo. I just click the button and I start talking a little bit, like kind of a CSI, like a coroner over the body, some contusions in the introduction, and I finish. I put their name on it and I email it to them. Done. So every added step that takes time for us to go into screen, again, I haven't used Screencastify for this, but if I have to go into an app, if I have to set it up, if I have to use it, so just put it this way, if using Screencastify or any other app, if it takes a minute longer for me to use that app to give the feedback, and I have 180 students, that's 3 hours. So I try to be, I've become really efficient at doing the voice feedback. The basic rhythm is, what do I notice? What do I notice? Don Graves' adage, read like a doctor, not a judge. So what do I notice? What do I notice? And then if I see something, I'm like, so in that introduction, one of the things that I think is really interesting is the way you do this, but when you revise, I want you to go back to that and do this. So the kids, generally they're getting this feedback and then they have to turn it into a to-do list of things that they then have to go back into the paper and revise. So basically what it sounds like is, I notice this one thing I see you doing here that I'd like you to go back when you revise, and I'd like you to do this with it. Sometimes I might put like a little star, and I'll say, like, look for that star, or the number 1 in that second paragraph. Look at that sentence right there, and when you go back, I want you to provide me some examples, or kind of go in and explain what's the importance of that. And then they have to go make those changes. And then when I look at their revised paper, I just sit with them one-on-one and look at the revision history of the paper. And what I tell them basically is, we're going to look at it for a very short period of time. And if it looks like you just made a ton of changes in response to my feedback, then it's going to go up a full grade. And if you didn't make any, it's going to go down a full grade. And if you made some, it's going to stay where it is. And I find that that works reasonably well. Also, like, the other reason I also like the phone is I can kind of do that anywhere. I don't have to actually be well, if I have a paper, if I have a printed version of a paper, then I don't have to do that. So I want to talk a little bit about what we got here on the screen. Time is, I'm out of shape for going without bells. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of a model of where I am in the mess of my own thinking in light of what we've been talking about. So as I said, I teach this junior class. It's got a lot of kids that would be in an AP class or an honors class if we were at a regular school, but we don't have AP classes. And so the book that they had read in the past was Kindred. It's a really interesting book. I wanted a book that was a step up, that was a little more at the college level, because I've been looking at the kids' reading scores, and I feel like they need to read at a little higher level. So based on some of my observations, so Beloved is available to me. I was able to get copies of Beloved, and the reason why I was also drawn to Beloved is that I'm trying to build more of a collaboration with the U.S. history teacher, and they're starting with Reconstruction. Excuse me. So I also, just to be honest, I saw this Toni Morrison documentary called Pieces of Me, I think. If you haven't seen that, you should watch it. It's just a beautiful documentary. So how am I going to have them read this? Well, we're going to be online, and I'm going to have to configure ways for them to read this book closely and carefully. but I want them to have choice. Right? I just think it's so important for kids to have choice. So one of the things that I'm looking into, you see that Toni Morrison, Goodness, Altruism, and the Literary Imagination. It's about a 4-page essay that's actually a lecture she gave at Harvard that is accessible enough to the kids. And it's about the question of goodness in literature. Excuse me. A little sip of water here. And she talks about how evil so often actually is kind of the star of the show, and goodness is often kind of seen cowering over in the shadows, very passive, things like that. And so it's a remarkable essay that introduces this idea of where the acts of grace and goodness and altruism in a work of literature, that celebrate the dignity of the human spirit. So one of the options I've decided is going to be like we'll all read that together at some point, but one of the options will be you can decide up front that I'm gonna write about goodness, and so you're gonna pick that essay as kind of a guide, as kind of a frame, and annotate, take notes, etc. as you read through the book. And at the end, be ready to write a paper. I mean, this is kind of the level that I've got it at right now. Be ready to write a paper about goodness in the work. And it's transformed my reading of the book, because you just have such powerful moments in Beloved. It's been a number of years since I read it. And then Toni Morrison talks about applying these principles to her own work, and going back through and seeing, does she have goodness and altruism. The other thing you see a picture of there is a little passage from her Nobel Prize speech. So one of the things that she talks about in her Nobel Prize is power, and who has it, and how do they get it, and what do they do with it. So one of the other options will be, I think, for kids to read her Nobel Prize speech and kind of see what she has to say about this idea of power. And that's as far as I've gotten in terms of looking at her own essays. Just yesterday or this morning, on Carol Jago talked about the different poetry resources, and so one of them was comes to me as poem a day. But this poem yesterday, Dawn Revisited, just seemed to resonate so powerfully with Beloved, the book. And so I wanted to put that in there, because that's the kind of thing that on the daily basis, like going back to some of Kelly's work with the notebook, like that's the kind of thing that I would be more likely to have the kids read that and go into the notebook and write about their own thoughts about second chances, or something along those lines. Carol did such a beautiful job last week about talking about the role of art, and you have some really remarkable art exhibits to be able to incorporate. You have the black and white drawing there is the work of Charles White. And so if you go online and look at the drawings of Charles White, and that's a drawing of, what does he call it, General Moses and Sojourner. So it's Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. And so because, Underground Railroad and, fugitive slaves is a big part of Beloved, I was looking into some of the different art to bring in, and then Jacob Lawrence's exhibit, The Great Migration. So, when you start trying to look at creating a unit and being intentional, there's a lot of different kinds of writing in there. There's writing about different works of art. There's connecting the work of art to the literature. There's writing kind of the more formal essay that's designed in part to kind of train them to be more intentional reading without, hopefully running the risk of committing read-aside, since Kelly's sitting in with us today. And I'm just so protective of kids' love of reading. I'm just, I can't say enough about it. So I'm going to stop there for a second and just see if anybody has any questions about, because what I'm really doing here is showing you, the mess of my thinking. Like, this is me in real time, working on, my first unit, for a book that I've never taught. And I'm trying to create the structure that's going to give the kids choices. And one of the choices, might even be, to basically to come up with your own topic. But I think when we come up with writing assignments, kids need to have, they need to have that element of choice that's going to make room for them to be engaged. So I think Shannon is asking, how do I balance like a book like Beloved when I'm along with more supplementary texts like those in Uncharted Territory. Mostly I'm alternating them. So most of the time I'm not working kind of with them as part of the same unit per se. In part because I actually didn't have copies of Uncharted Territory this past year until the very last part. My publisher gave us access, and you'll see that in a minute as a digital text. But definitely incorporating some of the shorter essays and things like that. I wanted to get permission to use Toni Morrison's Nobel Prize speech in the new edition, but denied. So when Madeline is saying, have I ever paired contemporary pieces with canonical pieces, are you saying like having the kids read two books, like having them choose between those, or kind of reading those as a pair, reading together? So the idea that immediately comes to mind when I think about that, Madeline, is I ordered, so one of my responses to the the Black Lives Matter movement and the questions that have come up in the last couple of months. I mean, they've been with us for a long time, but one of the questions that has really come up for me is to conduct a textual audit of the junior English class, right? So I'm new to it, so like I have some some place in some of the choices, others not. They were just kind of, that's what we taught, and it strikes me as a lot of white authors, not a very balanced perspective. And so over the summer, I just decided that there were books on the district curriculum while there was a little bit of money, which is probably not going to be around. And so I ordered There by Tommy Orange. This is leading to an answer to your question. I ordered a collection of short stories, or were they essays, by Viet Nguyen, called the Refugees. And I got that specifically to pair that with Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. So you could have an American Vietnamese author and an American author, both writing about some degree of similar things, and put those into conversation with each other as books. And so that I'm looking forward to doing that. The main other variation that I would say, going back to the question about pairing, is not having to have the chance to pair so much, but giving kids, letting kids have the option for reading literature circles. So having a wider range of books that kids can choose from, and then incorporating, including in there some, so like when I taught seniors, like one group could choose Frankenstein, as a more, class canonical text. Tanya, the book was Viet Nguyen's The Refugees. He wrote The Sympathizer, won the Pulitzer Prize for The Sympathizer. So he's got a novel, he's got a collection of short stories, he's got a collection of essays that he's writing about. There we go. So time is just going so quickly, and I don't want to completely skip out on questions. So let me just end with this. So these things here are not things that I was going to walk through specifically, but what they are there things that they're a variety of different kinds of things that I think we need to be aware of as part of that intentional design process. And so when we are designing an assignment, to look at it kind of goes back to the recipe, what are those verbs, whether we're doing daily writing, or whether we're doing kind of a longer term assignment. So what are the kinds of writing, when we start looking at the range of student needs and looking at UDL principles and things like that, which I think are coming more and more into people's world. But to be looking for those things, I think we absolutely, as I've brought up a couple of times, we absolutely have to not leave it to accident. Like part of this is an example of a design friction point for us. Like we simply can't get to the end of any point in a unit and realize like, oh yeah, God, I just totally forgot to think about whether this book and this topic and these tasks were in any way relevant or related to the lives of the kids that I teach. I think we can't have that. So whether it's questions like this or other questions, there's some links at the end to some specific frameworks for culturally responsive teaching practices. I think we have to, my program is, I want to say like 35% Asian, like a wide range of Asian cultures, 25% Latino, and then Pacific Islander and Native American, a couple African American students, not very many, and then white kids. But definitely stuff like this needs to just be part of our design process, as do these kinds of adaptations for students. So I'll leave this random thing up here, and I'll come back around to that as kind of like a last point. And I guess I'll just kind of leave you to go through the things that are in the rest of the slides. I didn't time it well. So let's have questions.
Here's a great question that kind of circles back to this idea of trust and community centering feedback. Madeline asks, how do we get students to the point where they look to or feel comfortable accepting feedback?
I think that has become, as many of my colleagues here with us today can appreciate, I think that has become a far more pressing issue than it used to be. And I'll explain what I mean a little bit with a brief anecdote. So I had a girl a couple of years ago who I gave her an essay back. She was in my senior class. And I said, this is my direct quote, or I wrote it or whatever. I said, well, your writing really shows a lot of potential. Now, if somebody said my writing really showed a lot of potential, I, being perhaps of my generation or whatever, would think, great. She heard, your writing sucks and you don't know what you're doing. But if you keep working at it, eventually you can overcome that, which is nothing related to what I was saying, and there's nothing really to validate that. And so basically, what I took from that is anything short of this is really the most amazing paper I've ever read. Which a friend of mine actually gave me a rubber stamp that says that years ago. I never used it, but and she didn't come to class for 2 weeks, and I just assumed because she was a senior that she was off visiting colleges. And then one day I saw her in the hall and I said, Kathy, where have you been? And it took a long time to work through that. So we have kids. Chalk it up to whatever you'd like, for whom getting feedback is really complicated. So on some level, I think you have to know your students, and the tone with which you deliver it. That's, I think, one of the reasons why I also like the voice feedback, at least when that's coming back on papers. I mean, I'm not giving them voice feedback on kind of daily stuff. But the voice feedback, the kids' feedback about that feedback is that they just find it really positive and encouraging. Right. So Barb was talking about like words, that are very loaded, right? Like to describe somebody's writing or something as articulate, there's certain words that can be very, very loaded in those ways. So I think, and some of those have kind of cultural reference points, I guess you'd say it, or kind of a history behind certain words. And so I think we just have to be very, very mindful and very intentional. At the same time, the feedback needs to be usable. I think if we go in the direction of playing it so safe, like in, what is it, Turnitin, you can like click on all these different little things, frag, all that kind of stuff, and that just seems so clear and safe and antiseptic that you'll never offend anybody, but you'll never help them be a better writer. So yeah, Kelly's suggesting Peter Johnson's book Choice Words, great book. So but I nothing is more valuable than getting to know your kids and building that trust. If I could actually, this diagram on the screen right now is kind of weird looking, but it relates to a lot of different things that we're talking about. So that box in the middle is essentially, you can think of that as a number of things. That can be your classroom that you want kids to come into. That can be a text that you want kids to come into. That is whatever you're trying to get kids into, your class, a discussion, a book, that you want them to read, a paper you want them to write. And you have, these red kids, blue kids, and green kids. The broken red line represents all the different things that can prevent them from getting in that box and doing what they're asked to do or expected to do. And one of those is going to be trust, right? You have kids that have horrible experiences with writing or with English or whatever it might be in the past, and you serve up that assignment, and they think, oh no, I'm really good because I did that last year and was totally humiliated in front of my class, and so I'll just take the F. Thank you very much. So we have to, we really do have to be mindful of those things that function to keep them from getting into the assignment and doing it, and that would cultivate that trust. So if we use words that they, in the directions that they don't understand, then we run the risk, so go over them in class. I mean, Tom Newkirk's embarrassment, this is one of the reasons that book I think was so helpful, is he talks about, all the ways in which kids can be embarrassed. And so they just, in this example, they just won't try to jump into that box. Then they won't get embarrassed because they won't get called out. Other questions?
So I know you've touched on this, but I think it's such an important question that we should revisit it.
Sure.
It's two-part question. What matters most in writing, and what should we be prioritizing now?
Well, of course, what we should be prioritizing is going to differ based on the grade level. So what? What was the first question again, Janelle? Sorry.
Sure. What matters most in writing?
What matters most? So there's a lot of different ways to answer that. You know, I mentioned in passing that I got out of high school. I graduated in like the bottom 10-15% of my class at a good high school. My dad dropped out of high school in the 9th, 10th grade. So I do not come from an academic background at all. And when I went to community college, American River College in Sacramento, I took the placement test and I ended up in remedial writing class. So what matters on some level is getting people to be able to simply write, and Kelly talked so well about that, when he was talking about the different ways that he's got kids writing in his class, that practice, that production. Like my kids write a lot. And they write about all sorts of different things. We kind of move in and out of it sometimes, but you get into those issues of fluency. There's this book, The Myth of Laziness, where he talks about output control. He's got a great quotation that that writing is the largest orchestra that your brain has to conduct. And when you think about that in an academic context, what that means is there's just all these different things that a kid is having to do that can make it so difficult to do the task, that could just shut them down. Going back to one of the earlier questions, I definitely feel like I have more kids that have issues with what I would just describe as perfectionism than I remember having in the past. In the past you get, a couple of kids, but could be in my program, but I think not. Like I've, a number of kids where they just get so stymied by it, and so that development of the permission to quote Anne Lamott, the permission to write badly, and to not feel like they're just writing. So that's why I write with my kids, to model it, and I'll share it with them, in all of its guts and glory, and create that culture in the class that it's, I have my kids read her chapters called Shitty First Drafts, and the kids generally call it, SFD. You could find that article online. There's actually a new memoir by Elizabeth Talent, the fiction writer, who wrote all sorts of wonderful books and hadn't come out with anything in the last 20 years, and she just came out with a memoir of perfectionism, and in large part trying to explain why she has not been able to write anything for the last or at least anything that she was willing to publish for the last 20 years. So I think that idea of what matters most, what matters is being able to get something out, and I spend a lot of time like with most papers. I feel like I have the kids write a couple of different ways of beginning it, right? We're practicing writing introductions. So I might say, here's a list of 6 different ways you can begin a paper like this. Here's a couple different models. Go home and pick whichever one you want and write an introduction based on that model. And then I might have them come in the next day and say, great, now write another one, and just do it in 10 minutes. Like just kind of get over yourself and get a really bad draft down. And then I might have them go home and write a third, and they might have to pick a completely different approach, right? So they're one's opening with an anecdote, one's with a question, and one's with a quotation or something. So you're trying to develop, it goes back to the word agile, right? Like we need the kids to be able to be, kind of very agile writers. If they're just learning kind of these formulaic things, then and again, go back to Kelly's workshop, look at the range of things and ways he's got his kids writing on a daily basis in his class. They're just, they're becoming very fluent, very agile writers. Because otherwise, the kids get hung up on, writing, squatting down and laying a golden egg as if there's no process. Then they just get overwhelmed by it.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jim. This will be our last question. As we design culturally relevant, equity-centered writing assignments for our learners, what are 2 or 3 words that we should be keeping in the front of our minds as we begin that first week or that first month of school?
So while I'm answering this, I'm going to just make sure I kind of scroll down to the end of these slides for some things. So there we go. So I've said this a couple times, but I really can't emphasize enough. I work really hard to get to know my students before they ever show up, and this has been true whether I taught 170 kids or 60 kids. So so yesterday we got our list of our students, for the coming semester in our program, and I printed that up, and I will, in the coming week, I'll be going in and looking at each kid's, records online, getting whatever information I can get. In our program, we also have to kind of wear the counselor hat and the administration hat and stuff like that. That's why we only teach a couple classes. I will write, I'll write a letter to all my students. I won't write one, like a separate letter to each student, but I'll really, I'll really write a nice letter. I want them coming to my class, to school, feeling welcomed. In our program, it's that much more, requires that much more trust, because they have to leave their, what we call their home school, to come to our program. So you've got these kids that are juniors. They've left, the school that they've gone to for 2 years and all their friends. And so a lot of them are coming and they're very anxious about that. I think I need to know, because you can't always tell from their names, their culture and other aspects of their background. So to go in and get whatever information I can, to get a sense of where that kid is coming from, is something that I really work hard, and I have them sit in seating charts, so I can just in the first weeks, for the specific purpose of being able to know their name, faster and get to know them more easily. This page that's up on the screen right now takes you to different links, several of which, these documents in here are excellent documents. A couple of them by Professor Kirkland, who's going to speak in the series in the fall. And so, I think understanding the importance and the truth of that student's culture, right? Whatever that means. And I've got my my brother-in-law, married an African-American woman, and their 3 kids they're great kids. It's been really interesting to watch them. I've seen this go on with other friends, kids, if they're bicultural, biracial, multicultural, multiracial, where their identity is really fluid, like if they're like 16 to early 20s, and to just validate that. We have a large group of, relative, to our population, a large group of LGBTQ students. So, to just know who that kid is and where they are coming from, and be willing to, it goes back to that word empathy, right? That first step in the design process, to start from that place of who are you, who are you trying to be, and so a lot of my writing early on is very much to get a chance to get to know those kids. No, the seating charts aren't online, Anne-Marie. They're like a paper thing that I set up, so I can make little notes on there about them. But I think starting with those needs or their culture, and where they and what they need as learners as well, right? Because I've got a fair number of kids with IEPs and 504s, and so not I try to identify who are the kids that in our context would be the first to go to college, so that I can kind of try to pick up on those kids and make sure that they'll need probably some of them that extra support in the college classes that they're taking as part of our program. So it's, I think if I was going to sum up a lot of what we've talked about today, one of the words that really, really comes through a lot, I think for all of us, is trust. And I think that's always a huge word, but I think it's probably, we would all probably agree that it's never been as big as it needs to be this year. And where's that trust? That trust is, can I trust you to be a good teacher for me within the constraints of the space that we're going to be working in, because that is for some kids, like kind of your high flyers, you're really ambitious kids, they're freaking out because they're having to trust us to teach them the things they need to know to be able to get into the college that they want to get into. For other kids, along the spectrum, they're trusting us to help them keep them from getting lost in a process that right now feels really alienating to them. So I send, I guess the one last little thing that I would say is I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I send a lot of notes out to kids, just short little notes about what a great thing you did in class today. It really did totally change the like you asked the winning question, like you made class today a better class because of the question that you asked, and that kind of stuff. And those efforts, when I'm in class in person, I have a stack of index cards up on my desk, and I'll very often, just dash off in my terrible handwriting some little comment, along those lines that I'll slip to the kid, on their way out or something like that, and let them know what a difference they made. So I just think it makes all the difference in the world to get to know that kid, and then that increases the likelihood that they will trust you. And then that, when the kid goes home, and if they go home to a family where they have dinner together and the parents ask them what's going on with school, then the kid's gonna say like, oh wow, Mr. Burke, at least he really seems to care. And then in that case we pass the dinner table test, which is, so what'd you learn at school today? So there's a lot of things I didn't get to talk about in there, but I felt like everything we talked about was really important. What you see on the slides that I didn't get to is just the model, like the actual screens to some extent from my class in the spring, and what it looked like to use the ebook, the Uncharted Territory, and try to teach from a digital textbook, which was a new experience for me. And so I let them choose whichever unit they wanted, and then get into those groups, and then kind of, I guess I would say it kind of functioned for the most part like an online lit circle group. And then they would meet with me and we would have really great discussions. So sorry I didn't get more time to go through all that, but I had a really great time. I hope you guys did too.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much for centering trust, centering our understanding of students, and centering the idea that it's our duty to create a welcoming environment. At this time, I invite Carol to provide her concluding remarks.
So thank you, Jim, so much for such an inspiring morning. You made me think about an expression by the late Bob Tierney: they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of your talk about empathy was kind of about that. I appreciate how you're helping us to be really intentional design thinkers, particularly in this era of remote instruction and all the uncertainty everybody's facing. I always love to watch your mind work and how you think things through, how thoughtful you are about what you do in the service of kids, and helping us to figure out how to reach out and engage them. So thank you so much for the really wonderful webinar. For all of you who watched, if you visit our website at rightcenter.org, you can fill out a 2-question feedback form, which will also serve as like a little certificate of participation if you need that. To everyone who joined us today from the United States and around the world, we really hope you will come to our September webinars. Just to tell you briefly about the 3 of them. The first one on September 14th is Dr. David Kirkland, the author of the white paper on culturally responsive sustaining education that Jim referred to. He is a distinguished professor at New York University, and he's also going to talk about anti-racist pedagogy. On September 21, we'll be hearing from Dr. Maisha Wynn. She's a chancellor's professor at UC Davis. She's going to talk about transformative justice in English language arts and also talk about design thinking. So should kind of relate to what Jim was talking about as well. We'll close with Antero Garcia, an assistant professor at Stanford, who's going to talk about writing as healing and how we can, Jim also talked about just sort of kids are hurting right now. There's, it's an emotional time, and he's going to talk about how you use writing to address that and also to help kids use their writing for civic engagement. So registration is now open for those 3 events. You can go to rightcenter.org and register. And I thank you all for being part of this learning community. The chat was great. And we appreciate that you commit yourself, your time, and your energy to this work. And we bid you goodbye for now. We hope we see you at future events.